there, it's Silver. This is Noreya, the Gold Project. I assume you pronounce it something like that, I'm not sure. This is a Metroidvania, and no, it's not a Souls-like. It may have a couple of recognizable elements of that sort of concept, I guess, but that's not what it's going for, that's not what it is. This is a more traditional Metroidvania platformer. But it's also got a couple of pretty unique ideas, some neat stuff going on here in terms of how the world works and stuff. So the first thing to talk about, though, would be how it looks, because it's a very pretty looking game. It's got this really detailed pixel art look to it, to where the characters and the enemies and things are all quite simplistic looking, but the environments have a tremendous amount of detail in them. And the bosses also have quite a lot of detail. Oftentimes they're quite large, so they have a lot of room for good pixel art details. The game overall has a really nice use of color, with each biome having a couple of sort of colors that it uses more than anything else as part of its sort of visual theme, and then everything else is kind of an accent. Like the area you're seeing now using, of course, a lot of blues in various shades, but also having accents of some pinks and greens that sort of bulk it out a little bit. Each area is like this, and it overall creates a really nice art style that I'm definitely a fan of. I've always been a fan of the more detailed pixel art backgrounds and stuff. So, you know, if you're going for a pixel art-ish setting, having a lot of kind of greeblies, a lot of like stone, cobble textures and little details like that, they just sort of add a lot to me in terms of how something overall comes together that's using this style. So I'm definitely a fan of how everything looks. And also the fact that the enemies are all made out of shadow means that they can sort of morph around almost in like a liquid-like state. So they all look kind of interesting as well, because they tend to sort of stretch and smear in various directions and look like they're made out of like an amorphous shadow. The music is also pretty solid. I would describe the overall theme of the soundtrack to be zen. It's quite a relaxing, somewhat somber soundtrack that I think is meant to be a kind of background to exploring a ruined world. It's that kind of vibe. And I think it does a good job of creating the sort of forlorn, lonely experience, which is clearly part of the game's idea. If you follow the bits of story that it does give you, you are kind of alone. You are a bit of a unique creature in this sort of world where things have gone wrong in various ways that you're trying to figure out. So it makes sense that you would be sort of picking through the ruins, and that the soundtrack would very much reflect that, and it certainly does. And even the boss soundtracks are a little more chill than you would expect. I mean, some of them do have some very actiony, upbeat music, but even of the ones that are like that, they're often not this big cacophonic choir or anything. They're more laid back than that. They're a little bit more reserved. So the core of the gameplay is based around this sort of tug of war between these two gods, and you can sort of choose your position in the war, as it seems. You have a god of greed and gold, and a goddess of light and shadow. And that two-colored gauge at the top middle of the screen represents who currently is in the sort of majority. And the way that you figure this is, occasionally you'll come across these big statue bases that don't have a statue on them, just empty bases. And you can choose to put a statue of either one of those on that base, and when you do so, you gain access to some various benefits. Just standing in front of a statue will heal you back to full. You can also sacrifice the currency of the game, the gold nuggets that you get from killing enemies, to these statues to get some skill points to spend, and you can only spend skill points when you are in front of one of the statues, so they also work that way. And every time you come across one of these empty bases and you choose which of the two statues you want to plop onto it, the gauge at the top of the screen goes more in that direction. And the one you choose actually does have some other benefits or some other things that go along with it as well. So for one, your skill tree is actually 3 different sort of branched skill trees that go together. There's the middle branch, which is something that you can spend points on whenever you want. They're sort of your skills. But the ones on the left and right are specific to one of those two gods. So every time you put a god of greed statue on one of those bases, then you will unlock a further tier of the greed skill tree, and the same goes for the light skill tree. So the more of any particular type of statue you have, the more advanced skills you can get throughout the skill tree. This does mean that if you choose to sort of alternate back and forth and kind of even them out, then you won't really get access to the highest tier skills of each side. And all skill points are equal, by the way. It doesn't matter which god you sacrifice the gold nuggets to, you just get a skill point that you can spend anywhere on the tree, although some skills do require more than 1 point to unlock. However, there's another bit that changes, and that's the world itself. So this is something I've never quite seen before in a game like this. The world seems to have two different states, a world of light and a world of gold. And whoever is in the majority up there at the top of the screen will determine which of the two states the world is in. I'm not 100% sure what this changes, I'll be real, because it's a little bit confusing and it's not well explained. This game basically explains none of its mechanics at all to you, so you sort of have to just figure it out. From what I can tell, whenever you choose one of the two statues and you switch over to one of those worlds, certain parts of the world change. Certain rooms or certain passages are altered. And this can lead you to loot and passageways and stuff that you didn't previously have access to. And then you can swing it in the other direction by choosing the other god a couple of times, and then the world will change again, and some other paths will be opened, but some of the ones that you previously used will be closed. That's how I interpret it to work. I'm not 100% certain, but it does seem to be kind of a case of specific parts of the map kind of rearrange depending on who is in charge. So that's definitely a pretty interesting idea. That's a mechanic I've never seen in a Metroidvania quite like this before, so I think it's neat, even if the game refuses to explain exactly how it works, and I'm not 100% sure on some of the specifics. It is a little bit confusing, but it is a neat idea nonetheless. Combat is pretty basic. In this game, you have, of course, a meter, a health meter that is just 1 heart per point of damage. They're not like partial hearts or anything. And you have a basic one-hit combo, so no combo at all when you first start the game. But some of the earliest skill tree purchases you can make include a 2- and a 3-hit combo to expand your capabilities a little bit, although you will find that your attack is frustratingly short. You have a very short range, a sort of stubby, short sword-looking weapon, so you do not attack very far in front of yourself. You also do have a heal, but it's a bit odd. So you can hold Y to heal. It works a lot like the Hollow Knight heal, where you sit in place for a second and then you get 1 health at a time for as long as you channel it. Except for one, this doesn't use charges or a magic gauge, but instead it uses your currency. It actually takes 10 of your gold nuggets away for every 1 HP you restore with it. So you actually have to pay to heal, basically, which is interesting. But the second thing about it that's a little weird is it's a long heal. It takes forever for it to go off. I timed about 4.5 seconds or so for 1 HP, which means if you've got like 9 or 10 HP and you're down to 1 and you want to emergency heal back to full, you could be standing in place for about 30 to 40 seconds at a time, which obviously means this heal is next to useless in combat because it takes such an obscenely, prohibitively long time to go off. You almost can never use it during combat, especially during boss fights, because there's no way a boss is going to leave you alone for that long and let you heal. There are a couple of bosses where I've been able to get like 1 or 2 hearts worth of healing very occasionally, but it was always at the expense of a time when I should have been hitting the boss because it was sort of stunned. That's basically the only time you can get one of these heals off, and even then it's still very questionable because it takes so long. The exploration and boss fights and everything are kind of an interesting idea because they're very non-linear. Like the world does have those classic Metroidvania elements where there are certain parts of it that you need certain skills to get to, but a lot of it is open from the start, and in fact a lot of the bosses are open from the start, where you can do many of the bosses in kind of whatever order that you happen upon them, and the bosses are actually numbered in the achievements, which gives you sort of an idea of what you're doing, because for me, my first 3 bosses were 1, 2, and then 5, so I obviously skipped a couple to get there. But this means that the exploration is very organic feeling, although this does have a pretty huge negative to the boss fights, which I'll explain later. But for now, the exploration part of this I think is a good idea. A lot of the bosses do give you some sort of power or something after you beat them that opens up further areas. So you'll get things, for instance, like a dash, which obviously allows you to clear larger gaps than you normally could, or something like the ghost form that allows you to transform into a ghost and interact with spirit objects that you previously couldn't touch. So there's a lot of fun exploration to be had here. If you are into Metroidvanias for the exploratory part, not necessarily for the boss fights, but for the actual world venturing, then this is quite a good one to get, I feel, because its exploration is probably its best aspect. You can often kind of separate the exploration into multiple tiers, where the sort of tier 1 exploration will be something that you can reach at any point in the game and doesn't require any specific set of skills, but the sort of second tier of an area will require something specific. This does have the unintended side effect of meaning, well, you know how in a lot of Metroidvanias when you reach an area you're not supposed to be yet, it'll be immediately obvious to you because like the gate to the area will be over a huge pit that you can't cross or up on a really high wall that you can't reach or something like that that makes it obvious you need to come back here later. Well, this game, because it has that sort of two-tiered exploration, it means you can get about halfway through an area before you realize you don't have what you need and you've got to turn back and walk all the way back out. So that is kind of unfortunate, especially when you consider that there is fast travel, but you've got to unlock it and you have to be standing in front of a statue to do it. So you are going to have to walk all the way back out of these areas when you discover that you don't have what you need. And there are nowhere near enough statues in the game. They're really rare. You just don't find very many of them, so you often will go very long stretches of gameplay with a ton of currency and just nowhere to spend it because you can't find another statue. I've actually been through a tough boss fight, a really tough platforming section, and then a second boss fight without a statue at all, so I had to just keep my currency through all of that just to sort of reach a statue finally. So yeah, there are nowhere near enough of them, and it does kind of put a damper on some of the exploration a little bit because it's easy to go very far in one direction but have to walk all the way back and not have a quicker way out because there are so few statues. However, that problem with the bosses and stuff that I was mentioning earlier, this is kind of my real only big issue with the game, and I think it's more of a me issue than something that's objectively wrong with the game. I think I just don't get this game's combat. I think there's something about it that doesn't gel with my brain and I don't know what to do. And to sort of illustrate what I mean, there are two bosses that I want to describe, and they kind of illustrate the issue that I have. So for one, there's this Golden Knight boss that you can fight that is really fun. He's a big old suit of golden armor, and he's afraid of ghosts. So what you've got to do is use your newly acquired spirit form to scare him, which will expose his weak point, and then you walk up and smack him in the belly button until he dies, basically. He's a really fun fight, and has a lot of fun patterns to dodge and stuff. It's just a memorable, well-designed fight. And the fact that it's this well-designed is because it's designed around one specific gimmick, the spirit form. This is a boss that you can only get to once you've gotten the spirit form, and so the boss is allowed to have mechanics that relate specifically to that one ability. However, there are several bosses in this game that you can get to without any specific ability, and those are the ones I have a problem with, because instead of being designed around this specific gimmick that made it obvious what to do, we have other bosses like, say, the Golden Widow, who I don't understand what to do with at all. She has a sort of low ground swipe as well as a charging forward rushing attack. However, they have the same wind-up, so it's impossible to tell which one she's about to do, despite the fact that you have to dodge each of them differently, so it's kind of necessary for you to know which one she's about to do. You just have to guess, and you got a 50-50 shot of whether or not you're going to take unavoidable damage. She can also do things in between phase transitions, like plopping up on the ceiling and then raining down projectiles on you, except these projectiles are extremely fast, and sometimes she will appear right above you before she does this. If she's at the edges of the area, you can dash away from these projectiles and not take any damage. But if the RNG is not in your favor and she just leaps right above you, then basically you have to be psychic and know exactly where the gap in the projectile is going to appear and start moving towards that gap before she even fires the projectiles. If you don't, you're going to take damage no matter what. In the second phase, she starts to use attacks so fast that you can't get close to her. Because you have such a stubby attack, you've got to get right in her face in order to do damage to her, but she's faster than you and has bigger range than you, so you can't actually get close to her without taking damage constantly. She also has a really far-reaching lunging attack that sometimes she just randomly decides to do without doing the wind-up first, so you have no idea that it's about to come out. It just suddenly happens, and you will pretty much guaranteed be in the hitbox as soon as it starts. So this is a boss that is not designed around any specific ability because you can get to her kind of whenever, I think. Or at the very least, none of her attacks have any sort of gimmick that informs the use of one specific thing. And all this means I don't really get what I'm supposed to do. Like, I don't know how to fight her. It doesn't seem to make any sense. It seems that her attacks are meant for a different game where I'm playing a different character that has very different controls and capabilities, because the one I'm controlling right now cannot deal with any of the stuff that she's throwing at me, and I don't really understand what to do. There was another boss just before this, the boss that gives you the dash, where you basically, because your attack is so short ranged, have to stand right where the boss's projectiles spawn. You have no other choice. So how are you supposed to not take damage? I don't know. There is no gimmick for this fight, so you just have to tank it and hope that you kill the boss before you die. I don't really understand the bosses that are designed this way, and that's kind of my problem with roughly half the bosses and half the enemies in this game. they have really nearly impossible feeling to dodge attacks that are just way faster than you can ever be and have a longer range than you have, which means I don't get what I'm supposed to do. The parts of this game that are designed around having specific skills are really fun and have some memorable boss fights, but the parts that are designed to be reached whenever, they have to be designed around not having those skills because you can reach them whenever. So they're not designed with anything in mind, and they just come across as very messy and frustrating. So overall, I actually quite enjoyed a lot of my earlier time with this game, but as it wore on, I started to get very, very frustrated with it and stopped understanding what it was actually expecting of me. So I think that maybe this is the sort of Metroidvania that's just not for me. I think that if you're the kind of person that this actually sounds and looks quite interesting to, then you'll probably not find my frustrations and you'll have a much better time than I did. So I think it still is a pretty good game that is actually worth getting if you're a fan of the genre. I just think that your mileage may vary on certain aspects whether or not they frustrate you. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Noreya, the Gold Project. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.